The moment I stepped through the towering glass doors of my aunt's mansion, I could feel the weight of it all pressing down on me again. Crystal chandeliers glittering like judgmental eyes, expensive heels tapping against marble floors, and the scent of overpriced perfume thick enough to choke on. Everything about the Wilson family reunion screamed wealth, success, and power, except for me. I stood near a window, my simple black dress doing exactly what I intended, blending me into the background. I watched as my cousins held court, tossing around titles like Senior VP and Managing Director, as if they were confetti. Laughter echoed across the room, but none of it reached me.
Not that I wanted it to.
Valerie, Aunt Lorraine's voice pierced through the noise, sharp as ever. I almost didn't see you there. Still playing assistant, dear? I turned with a careful smile and lifted my champagne glass, just slightly. Administrative coordinator, actually. She let out a laugh, so brittle it could have cracked her martini glass. Oh, how quaint. Before I could reply, my cousin Brandon sauntered over, fresh off a LinkedIn post celebrating his promotion to partner at my uncle's law firm. Val, come on, he said with a smirk. I could get you something real. Something that actually moves your career forward. You're wasting your time pushing paper. I stared at him, thinking about the global contracts on my desk, contracts I had personally negotiated. My company, my empire. I'm good where I am, I replied, voice steady. Aunt Lorraine tilted her head, her diamond earrings catching the chandelier's light. Darling, you have so much potential. It's just, well, a shame no one's helping you use it. Look at your cousins, executives, entrepreneurs, CEOs. And you? Still answering phones. I smiled again, tighter this time. If only they knew. If only they had the slightest idea that I had been the one pulling strings from behind the curtain for nearly a decade. But that was the point. They never looked past the surface. They never asked, never cared to know more than what I told them. They had dismissed me the same way they always had. Just like when I was fresh out of grad school, full of ambition and naive hope. I remembered standing in that very room 10 years ago, pitching my idea to restructure failing companies. I'd practiced for weeks, believing someone in the family would see the brilliance in it. Instead, they'd laughed. Consulting, my Uncle Ray had scoffed. Leave that to the big firms. You want to build something? Start in the mailroom. Earn it. Like the boys. The boys. That was always the story. The Wilson family built empires for their sons and handed out expectations to their daughters. Marry well, look pretty, stay quiet. That night, 10 years ago, I decided two things. 1. I would never ask them for help again. And 2. I would prove them all wrong, even if it meant hiding in plain sight. And so I did. The assistant they all saw? That was a carefully constructed role, an illusion I wore like armor. While they boasted at galas and golf courses, I was building something real, something powerful, Summit Strategic, a consulting firm I had founded, grown, and nurtured into one of the most effective turnaround companies in the industry. All without ever putting my name on the door. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stood there, sipping champagne they assumed I couldn't afford, listening to people who thought I was invisible. They had no idea. But they would.
Soon.
10 years ago, I walked out of business school with a shiny degree in one hand and a head full of ideas that kept me up at night. I had something special, a new approach to corporate consulting that could save failing companies before they collapsed. I had built the entire plan from scratch, tested every angle, researched every gap in the market. All I needed was a chance. So I brought it to my family. It was a mistake. The Wilsons gathered in the same marble-floored parlor where they always talked business over scotch and dismissive smirks. I stood in front of them, my uncles, my older male cousins, even my grandfather, pitching my heart out. They listened for exactly 3 minutes before the interruptions began. Consulting, my Uncle Ray chuckled. You're not McKinsey, sweetheart. Cute idea, Brandon had added, not even looking up from his phone. But you should probably just join HR in one of the family companies. Learn the ropes, maybe get a decent office if you stick around long enough. I kept pushing, thinking someone would see past the layers of condescension. But they didn't. They didn't want to. Because in the Wilson family, women didn't lead. They supported. They planned charity events, attended board dinners as decoration, or worked as assistants in the companies run by their brothers and husbands. That was the limit. You can always marry well, Aunt Lorraine offered when everyone else had finished tearing my dreams to pieces. That's still the best strategy, you know. I left the room that night feeling humiliated, but not defeated. Something had cracked wide open inside me. I knew then that if I ever wanted a seat at the table, I'd have to build the table myself.
So I did.
I found a tiny, dusty office above a Chinese restaurant downtown. The rent was cheap, the ceiling leaked when it rained, and the only desk came with a broken drawer, but it was mine. That's where Summit Solutions was born. No investors, no family money, no big launch. Just me, a laptop, and the raw determination to prove them all wrong. My first client was a local manufacturing company on the verge of collapse. They'd been rejected by every big-name firm in the city. I met the owner at a networking event, handed him my card, and told him I could turn things around in 3 months. He laughed at first, but then he gave me a shot. And I did exactly what I promised. I overhauled their supply chain, restructured their debt, cut unnecessary overhead, and renegotiated contracts that were bleeding them dry. By the end of the 3rd month, they were profitable for the first time in 2 years. Word spread quietly. That was the key. Everything Summit Solutions did in those early days was under the radar. I used NDAs, so strict even my team didn't know my full name. I stayed invisible just like my family wanted me to be. Only this time, it was by design. They had tried to bury me. They never realized I was a seed. After that first success, everything began to move, slowly at first, then like a snowball rolling downhill. The client I'd saved from bankruptcy told a friend, who told a friend, who told another. They never used my name, just whispered about a consulting firm that did what the big names couldn't: save companies from the edge. Summit Solutions became the go-to fixer for businesses others had already given up on. But I made one thing clear from the beginning: discretion was non-negotiable. Every employee signed airtight NDAs. My name never appeared on contracts or company documents. No photos, no press, no LinkedIn profiles. I was the CEO, but to the outside world, I didn't exist. And that was exactly how I wanted it. I hired people who didn't care about titles or public credit, only results. People who believed in rebuilding instead of destroying. We operated like a ghost team: quiet, precise, effective. By the time our 5th client had turned their books around, I knew we had something real. We expanded to a small team, then a 2nd office, then a 3rd. I never stopped reinvesting. I lived modestly, kept the original office above the Chinese restaurant for years, and maintained the illusion that I was just another anonymous admin assistant at a faceless consulting firm. Especially when my family came around. Anytime a Wilson walked through the doors of Summit, usually looking for a cheap acquisition or to flex their name, I slipped into character. Low ponytail, neutral lipstick, cardigan, and glasses. I brought coffee, took notes, and never said more than 5 words unless prompted. They never looked closely, never questioned it. Once, Uncle Ray came in to negotiate a takeover with a firm we had just saved. I sat across the table from him, quietly flipping through paperwork while he chuckled about how this mystery CEO was probably some bored rich kid pretending to know business. I almost laughed out loud. The irony was delicious. With every passing year, Summit's influence grew. We operated in more cities, handled bigger accounts, and were quietly being named as the invisible force behind some of the most impressive corporate turnarounds in the industry. We were never listed. That was the rule. Let others take credit. Let others talk. We built. We fixed. We protected. And always in the shadows, I watched. My family still talked down to me at reunions. Still offered to get me a real job. Still assumed I was the help. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see. Because while they were busy talking about themselves at charity galas and family brunches, I was rewriting the rules of business under their noses. It was never about fame or recognition. It was about strategy, about power, about proving, first to myself and eventually to them, that I never needed their help to succeed. The more they overlooked me, the stronger I became. And soon they were going to find out just how strong. 3 months ago, I received an email flagged as urgent. Williams Manufacturing, an old, family-run company on the brink of collapse, was seeking immediate restructuring help. I knew the name. Everyone in my family did. It had been one of Uncle Robert's acquisition targets for years. A perfect match for Wilson Ventures style. Identify a struggling business, buy it for pennies, strip it for parts, and flip it for profit. They called it strategy. I called it corporate cannibalism. When Williams reached out to Summit Solutions, I knew something was different this time. Uncle Robert had already begun the hostile takeover. But Williams wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Their board had heard whispers about us, about the firm that worked in shadows and quietly saved companies others had written off. I reviewed their numbers, met with their leadership, and agreed to take the case. Over the next several weeks, my team and I got to work aggressive cost restructuring, renegotiating supplier contracts, and shifting internal leadership to stabilize morale. It wasn't easy, but by the end of the second month, the tide had turned. Williams Manufacturing stock began to rise.
Fast.
Uncle Robert had underestimated their resilience, and my involvement. His public offer to acquire the company began to look less like a confident power move and more like a desperate gamble. The market noticed. Investors noticed. And eventually so did my family. That's when things got interesting. One morning, my assistant Maya walked into my office holding her tablet with raised eyebrows. "You've got a meeting request," she said, trying not to smile. "Wilson Ventures. They're requesting a discussion regarding a potential merger with Williams Manufacturing." I took the tablet and stared at the details. The meeting was set for the following morning, 9 a.m. At my office. The irony nearly made me laugh. For years, I had watched them circle businesses like vultures, dismantling livelihoods while sipping champagne. And now, unknowingly, they were walking straight into my conference room, hoping to negotiate a deal with the very firm that had outmaneuvered them. With me. My name was still not listed in any public-facing documents. To them, Summit CEO was a mystery, someone too powerful to meet in person, too private to be found online. And they had accepted the meeting expecting to finally get their foot in the door. Instead, they would walk into a room expecting to charm or bully their way to a deal, only to find the woman they had belittled for a decade sitting at the head of the table. For the first time, they would see me, not as a secretary, not as someone's assistant, but as the woman who had been quietly protecting what they had spent years trying to destroy. And I intended to make every single second of that realization count. The next morning, I arrived early, earlier than usual, earlier than necessary. My private elevator opened onto the executive floor of Summit Solutions, where floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city I had quietly conquered. Gone was the plain black dress from last night's reunion. Today, I wore a deep navy suit, sharply tailored, commanding attention.
It was a power suit for a power play.
Maya stood waiting with her usual calm, but couldn't hide the gleam in her eyes. "They're here," she said, holding up the tablet. "Your Uncle Robert, cousins Brandon and James, and, of course, your favorite Aunt Lorraine." I smiled. "Are they in the main conference room?" She nodded. "And yes, your aunt already asked for coffee. I told her the assistant would be in shortly." That almost made me laugh. For 10 years, I'd played the quiet girl who fetched the coffee. The one who always stood, never sat. The one they never looked at twice. They had never once noticed that the woman refilling their cups was also the woman building a company that would one day sit between them and the deal they were so desperate to win. I checked my reflection in the glass wall.
Composed. Sharp.
"Ready. Give me 2 minutes," I said to Maya. "Then bring the contracts." From behind the heavy conference room doors, I could already hear them. My uncle's commanding voice, my cousin's confident chatter, and Lorraine's laugh, as artificial as her smile. I took a breath, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The conversation died instantly. My uncle sat at the end of the table, the seat he probably assumed belonged to him. Brandon and James flanked him, both in designer suits that screamed family money. Aunt Lorraine sat nearby, inspecting her nails like she was too bored to be bothered. She looked up at me, frowning. "Valerie, what are you wearing?" And where's the coffee? I walked past her and took the seat at the head of the table, my seat. I don't serve coffee anymore, Aunt Lorraine, I said evenly. In fact, I never really did. Uncle Robert narrowed his eyes. What is this? Where's the CEO of Summit? We were promised a face-to-face. You got one, I replied, folding my hands on the table. I'm the CEO. I have been since the day I founded this company. For a moment, the room was silent. Brandon blinked.
Wait.
What? James dropped his pen. Aunt Lorraine's jaw actually fell open, her carefully constructed expression breaking for the first time in years. Uncle Robert stood. That's ridiculous. You're secretary. Always have been. No, I said calmly. That was just the role you saw. The role you wanted to see. You were so convinced I couldn't be anything more that you never even considered, looking deeper. The door opened, and Maya walked in with the contracts. She handed them out with precise efficiency and stood quietly behind me. These are the merger terms, I said, tapping the documents. They outline the conditions under which Summit Solutions will agree to partner with Williams Manufacturing. You can't be serious, Brandon sputtered. This is some elaborate prank, right? I reached for the remote and projected Summit's current financials onto the wall screen. Summit Solutions currently manages over $120 billion in client assets. Our restructuring success rate is over 90%. And our approval is required for any significant changes to Williams Manufacturing's operations. I turned to face them fully. You failed in your takeover. Now you're here asking for a merger. And that decision rests with me. Uncle Robert's face was turning a dangerous shade of red. You've been sabotaging our deals. I've been saving companies, I corrected. Companies you tried to tear apart. Peterson Industries, Davidson Group, Maritime Logistics, all saved by Summit. All kept out of your hands. James looked down at the numbers in front of him like they were written in a foreign language. This is betrayal, my uncle growled. No, I said softly but firmly. This is business. The kind you taught me. Seize opportunity. Don't blink. Show no weakness. Isn't that what you always said? Brandon rose from his chair. I'm calling our legal team.
You already did, I said.
Your firm spent 3 months trying to win me as a client. You even signed a non-disclosure agreement. That means I already know your strategies. Maya stepped forward again and placed another folder in front of my uncle. This contains Summit's current market standing and liquidity reports. We are now in a position to acquire a controlling interest in Wilson Ventures if these terms are not signed by 5 p.m. Aunt Lorraine looked like she might faint. You'd never, Uncle Robert began. I stood. Try me. Decline the merger, and tomorrow morning, Summit begins buying your stock. Silence. Aunt Lorraine, I added, turning to her. That champagne you offered me last night? I bought the vineyard last year. That coffee you were waiting on? My chain supplies it. My salary does allow for expensive tastes. As I left the room, I didn't look back. But I didn't have to. I could feel their stunned silence behind me like a second skin. After a decade in the shadows, I had finally stepped into the light. And I had never stood taller. The fallout began before I even made it back to my office. My phone lit up with texts, Aunt Lorraine asking to talk over lunch, Brandon claiming it was all a misunderstanding, and James texting we're family, Val. Don't do this. I ignored every one of them. By noon, the board of Wilson Ventures had convened an emergency meeting. They weren't fools. The numbers were there in black and white. Summit Solutions had the leverage, the credibility, and the power to buy them out if pushed. At 3:17 p.m., I received confirmation. The board had voted to accept Summit's merger terms. But Uncle Robert was never the type to surrender with grace. He stormed into my office unannounced, face flushed with anger and disbelief. Maya moved to stop him, but I waved her off. Let him have this moment. You've betrayed your family, he snapped. We built something that was supposed to last. And now you're tearing it apart just to prove a point. I didn't even look up from my computer.
No.
I'm rebuilding it. I'm giving it purpose. Something you never bothered to do. We gave you everything. I laughed, a bitter, sharp sound. You gave me nothing.
You dismissed me. You talked over me.
You told me I was lucky to be in the room. He stood there in silence, the fight starting to drain from his posture. Slowly, I pushed a folder across the desk toward him. These are your options, I said, looking him dead in the eye. You can stay on as a consultant, help transition Wilson Ventures into something more sustainable, something ethical, or you can take your golden parachute and walk. He opened the folder with shaking hands, eyes scanning the details. You thought of everything. I learned from the best, I said. Just not in the way you hoped. By the next morning, the media had gotten wind of the story. Secret CEO exposes billion-dollar family empire. One headline read. Another called me the ghost in the boardroom. Photos of me in that navy suit, taken by someone in the lobby, no doubt, circulated like wildfire. My LinkedIn inbox exploded. Business schools requested speaking engagements. Female entrepreneurs sent thank you notes. And the power dynamic? Flipped entirely. Brandon was suddenly very quiet in meetings. James stopped interrupting me. Aunt Lorraine went from smug commentary to silent nods when I entered a room. It wasn't just respect, it was realization. For years, they had tried to define me by what I wasn't. Not ambitious enough, not tough enough, not man enough. And all along, I had been building something they never saw coming. Something smarter, stronger, something mine. The balance had shifted. I was no longer the overlooked niece or the forgettable assistant. I was the CEO who changed everything. And the best part? I did it my way. The news didn't just spread, it caught fire. Every outlet ran the story. Not just because I had outmaneuvered a powerful family, but because I had done it quietly, strategically, without ever needing to shout. My inbox filled with messages from women across the country, CEOs, students, interns, telling me that my story gave them hope, that it made them feel seen. One message, from a young intern, stuck with me the most. I thought I had to become someone else to succeed. But you showed me I can build something real and stay true to who I am. Business schools invited me to speak. Panels called. Magazines requested interviews. But what mattered most were the moments that came without cameras. Former assistants who had worked at Summit during the early days, now running departments of their own. Female executives who had stayed quiet for years, now finally stepping forward. Quiet gratitude from those who had been underestimated too many times. 3 months later, I stood on a stage accepting an award for Business Innovation of the Year. The applause thundered around me, but I only saw one face in the crowd, my mother. She had left the Wilson family years ago, walked away from the power games and the judgment. She was the first person who ever told me I was capable of more. She smiled at me from the front row, eyes filled with pride. Later that night, I returned to my office, long after the building had emptied. I opened the storage closet and pulled out the old desk, the one from above the Chinese restaurant. The wood was still scratched, the drawers still stuck, and one of the legs still wobbled slightly. I ran my fingers along the surface, remembering the nights I worked until sunrise, doubting myself, hiding my dreams under layers of caution. I placed the desk by the window in my office, not as a decoration, but as a reminder, a piece of my beginning. Because success isn't about grand entrances or loud declarations. It's about the things you build when no one's watching. The choices you make when everyone doubts you. The work you do in silence, day after day, until the world can't ignore it anymore. Power isn't what people expect. It's what you quietly build.